Okay, good morning. It's 9 o'clock. As you can see, it is not Heather this morning, it is me, Jordan. And we are going to be going over 3rd John. There's only one chapter for 3rd John. And it's pretty short. It's a pretty short chapter. It's 13 verses, but it's in here, so we're going to go over it. I'll give you guys a minute to log on. Good morning, good morning. I posted my notes, but as you can see, I'm in my truck. I'm at work, and I didn't print out my notes, so I'm going to try and I can't see my notes, even though I posted them, but so I'm going to try and go through. But if you guys read the notes, and if anything makes sense or jumps out, then feel free to bring it up or comment, because we're going to have some extra time. Usually I just ramble or talk or whatever. Good morning, everybody. Signing on there. Good morning. Usually I fill the whole time with my commentary, but since it's such a short chapter, I guess I'll give you guys a chance to add in here. So, 3rd John. I'm just going to read through it. I'm in the NIV, and we'll read through it and then go over some notes here. Good morning, everybody. Okay, here we go. The elder, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health, and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy to have some brothers come and tell me about your faithfulness to the truth, and how you continue to walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought therefore to show hospitality to such men, so that we may work together for the truth. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will have nothing to do with us. So if I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, gossiping maliciously about us. Not satisfied with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but do what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself. We also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. I have much to write you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace to you. The friends here send their greetings. Greet the friends there by name. So, interesting. I mean, this is definitely a very personal letter, and yet it's still chosen. It was chosen to be added to our canon. You know, nothing really, to me, there's nothing groundbreaking in this, and yet it's added. So what is this to corroborate? What is this to add to? What is this to back up? What is this to solidify in the other text is kind of how more I was reading this. Does this build on previous teachings or build on other ideas? I mean, off the bat, there's a few references here that we've seen in his previous letters that are interesting. You know, I mean, it reveals who John is, and it also reveals who Christ is to John. And I think that if we look at the arc of our life, we should be able to see the growth of Christ in our life, but also that he hasn't changed in our life. You know, he is the same, and then our understanding of him grows. First thing to me that jumped out, verse 7, John says, "It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. And name there is capitalized. So, he's giving that word to actually be a title. It's a proper noun, is how I think what they would say. I don't know. Our son's in second grade and he's going over that stuff, but Heather helps him with the English. So I think that would be a proper noun, to where he's capitalizing a word that would otherwise not necessarily be associated, with Jesus. I mean, whose title is name, but John makes name a name for Jesus. He's done that in other places. I mean, we see in the beginning of John where he says the word, and he capitalizes word. He makes, I think one of the things that I wrote in the notes, I remember this phrase that I use, is that John kind of hijacks the common language and just associates or gives Jesus the title to every word in the language. Any good word, John says, yeah, that's the name of Jesus. The word, okay, yeah, that's Jesus. The name, yeah, that's Jesus. And I looked up, briefly some of the titles for Jesus that John attributes or associates or gives, as an actual title to Jesus. And man, Son of Man, Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, but throughout the writings of John, there's everything good, that's Jesus, is what he says, and it's interesting. His time with Jesus, John's physical time with Jesus, so changed his life that he was unable to disassociate everything good in the world from Jesus. He says, if it's good, it came from him. There is nothing outside of Jesus that's good, and that's pretty cool. Our experiences definitely filter the way that we see him. And John had a relationship with the Lord that it marked him forever. That's one of the things there, in verse 7. If anybody has any thoughts or ideas on that stuff. I see some more folks have joined in. Good morning. Good morning. Verse 9. Verse 9, I wrote a little thing here. It says, John says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will have nothing to do with us. And that's in stark comparison to the commendation that John's giving in verse 5 to Gaius. He says, Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. I had just made something that stood out, and that is that Diotrephes was in love with being first. And so, we can call that just a couple words for that. Selfishness obviously is one of when you're choosing yourself to be first above others. Pride, arrogance, these things. But Gaius was loving in a manner worthy of God, John says. And so he was blessing, let's see, what did I say here? It said, love of and for God welcomes strangers into your life. You will receive brothers, sisters in the Lord. This says they're even strangers. He received them in a way that was honoring God, even though they were strangers, because of his love for God. But love for self always pushes others away. In so much as the self-protection thing. I would imagine that John was pretty well known, and that some of these other fellows were pretty well known, that were hanging out with John, that were traveling with John at the time. So the way I read it is Diotrephes didn't want John and those guys coming around because he wanted to be known as the guy. Diotrephes was the guy. He was the one in charge of making the decisions of who could come in, the way that the local church was running there, is how I read this, at least, or the the connotation here, the way that I'm reading it. So it's like, if we're only after building, or if our goal, or our concern is building our kingdom, and then protecting our kingdom, then we're not willing to accept or let in other folks, because of the fear. Really, it's fear-based, I mean, if we're not going to receive people in, it's because we fear either we have too little, like we'll lack and they'll take our stuff, and then, what do we have? Or we fear being, looked at lesser than. There's a number of things here, but really it comes down to not having known your place in God, and knowing that we're just stewards here, and the stuff that the way that we handle ourselves and our assets and our time and our relationships, that's, like John says in verse 5 and 6 to Gaius, you're doing this in a way, in a manner worthy of God. And that's, something to consider here. Mr. Pelt saying, we prove our love for God by how we love other people. Yeah, I mean, John gets into that here, in his earlier epistles for sure, and then he kind of wraps it up again here at the end, John, in the first gospel, in the Gospel of John, he talks about the stuff that he's really recounting that Jesus was saying was about the way that we'll be known, and it's by the way that we love our brothers, and that's the way that they'll know that we're his disciples, that we're following the teachings of Christ. Verse 11 here, I have, well, if anybody has any, thoughts on that, feel free, because I really only have like 2 more points here, because it's a pretty short book. But verse 11, and this one's pretty cool. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. There's a lot of interesting stuff in that verse even. Let's see what Trisha's saying. It's saying, being boastful never gets us anywhere. In fact, it shows what's in your heart, which is not true love. Sure, I mean, like Paul said, the things that I boast of are the works of God in my life, not the things that I've done. And that's where we have our value, and it really goes back to the knowing who we are, that the things that we have been provided for, or provided of God, by God, for us. That includes other people in our life. It's not just our stuff. It's the way that we handle our relationships and our time, and steward our energy and the things that we're investing in. This idea that John has, or this statement that he makes, that anyone who does what is evil has not seen God, is pretty interesting. I think we can take that a couple different ways, because Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And certainly there were lots of those who were walking around who physically saw Jesus, but they continued to sin. So, or rather, doing what is evil. I mean, sinning and doing what is evil, maybe there's a difference there for this purpose here, what he's saying. What do we have here? We've got my ladies saying, those who seek to be first will be last, positioning ourselves as servants and helpers to our brothers and sisters will allow the kingdom to be realized and seen here. For sure. For sure. So anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Imitators, dear friends, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. And I was thinking about what imitating is. Imitating is looking at something, taking it in, beholding it, and then choosing to try and emulate it, choosing to try and copy it or replicate it, to do it again. I heard a musician interviewed the other day, and he was talking about how, as a young musician, we're all really just trying to exactly rip off the other musicians that we like. And I wouldn't totally agree with that. But he was saying, at least for him, he's like, I was trying to write a Beatles song, basically. But I'm not the Beatles. I'm not near as good as the Beatles. So what came out was kind of this amalgamation of Beatles mixed with, the Stones and Aretha Franklin or something, whatever he was into. Michael Jackson, I think he referenced. So, he was wanting to write a Beatles song because he was trying to imitate them, but he couldn't do it exactly. So what came out was this new thing, and everybody says, oh, you're great, In his case, everybody says it. Not everybody who tries to write a Beatles song sounds great, but so anyways, the principle there is he was studying the Beatles, liked the Beatles, wanted to sound like the Beatles, but he didn't have the ability fully to do it, So I was thinking about imitation, John here saying, do not imitate what is evil. Don't study and try to do that stuff. I know Leah's talked many times that, the last days that there will be lawlessness, just unbridled wickedness, basically, throwing off any concern or desire for anything right and good. And, to study the fathers before us and say, yeah, I want to do good in their vein, like Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ, John even saying, when we're I'm jumping back because we're gonna go back to 1 John and reference there. John is showing that preferring self is evil. We want a feel-good love, but God's type of love is to give yourself even unto death, right? Of course, that's what Jesus says. The greatest display of love is to lay down his life for another. And that's, I can imagine most, or let's say a lot of Christian counselors even, if we want to even get into that, Christian counselors would say, well, you can only give to a certain degree. If you lay down your life entirely, you're of no good to anybody else. And that may be true, I guess, in some situations, but, Jesus knew when it was time, and that's the other thing. Knowing the timing of the Father. Like John says, let's go to 1 John 3, 2 and 3. This kind of lines up with this last verse here in 3 John, but 1 John 2 and 3 says, 1 John 3, verse 2, dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. I think, like, even kind of how I was saying earlier, that Jesus in the physical form was on earth, and a lot of people saw him in his physical form and continued to live in a wicked way. But actually, I'm thinking about it, even the people that he would meet, and he would perform a miracle, and they would say, go and sin no more. And I've always thought, man, that is so weird. How can you ask somebody, or even command somebody, to go and sin no more when we're in a world, and But it may be that because they saw him in his glorified state, in a way, by him performing a miracle and displaying, I am God in flesh on earth. I am Emmanuel. That because he was able to reveal in part his wholeness, that they saw him as he really was. And so then they were able to live that out. You know, John says, when we see him, we will be like him when we see him as he really is. You know, not this thin veil, this dimly lit light that we have here. Lots of people here commenting in. Maybe let's see here. Every time I hear the word imitation, I always think of a counterfeit. It looks, acts, sounds, etc. like the genuine article. It's frightening. Yeah, but there can be imitators of good, too. I understand the connotation for sure, an imitation, you know, like you get, like, I have it's probably not great, but I like, you know, seafood, what is it, like those seafood subs, seafood salad subs, you know, it's probably terrible, but it's because it's mayonnaise based, and I love it so much. Tuna fish, whatever. But, you know, it's imitation crab. It's like, I don't even know what it is. You know, it's not real crab. It's not like I could afford to eat a crab sub, but I can have some imitation crab. And I'm sure it's not good for you, you know, to eat an imitation crab sub every day. So I don't do it every day, but every other day is probably okay. But, you know, it's usually lesser than, you know, we get the imitation because we can't afford the real. And that's the thing. Like, Jesus has provided the way for us to access the real, him, you know. And so he gives us that opportunity to come. Like he says, follow me, John. Come on, let's go. And John did. And John saw the real. And so John was forever changed. There's Jada saying, it makes me think of people who get saved, but imitate ungodly leaders without conviction, or getting saved and still living holy like the world. They've not seen God, so there's no transformation until we see God. That's right. You know, until I've been thinking about this. I was talking with Leah about this the other day. You know, like whose call have we responded to? Type thing. Like John was called by Jesus. You said, "Come and follow me." So John followed Jesus, and then Jesus changes John's life. You know, because of his time with him. And then Jesus, you know, ascends, and he's no longer here physically. So John then is writing out letters and calling people to follow Christ in the way, you know, and in the ways that Jesus called John to follow him. So there's this, you know, this game of telephone down the line. Now we've gotten however many years later, you know, and there's people responding to a call from somebody for something, but if it's not to follow Christ in the way that the Messiah laid out as his way of following him, then it shouldn't really be much of a surprise when there's a mixture, when there's pollutants in this, you know, in this, I guess it's doctrine, is what it, I mean, you know, these shortcuts, these imitations even. Like, yeah, you know, we've got a seafood buffet over here, but it's all imitation crab. It's like, who would go to a seafood restaurant who only served imitation stuff? Unless it's like some vegan place, you know, and they're like, yeah, you know, we've got like, you know, whatever, fake tuna, it's made out of soy. But who would go get dressed up to go to a fine dining experience where the only thing on the menu was imitations? It doesn't make any sense, and that's not really even the point of what he's saying here. I'm kind of on a tangent. He's saying don't imitate evil, wickedness. Do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Imitate the good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does good is from God. So he's saying that there is no good apart from God, and if you're able to do that, then you're with him. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God, because John was so affected and changed by spending time with Jesus that he said, when you see him, we'll be like him, you know. If you have seen him, you cannot do the other. If you've seen Jesus in the glorified state, and you're submitting to that and you're following that, you are in that, you know? Let's see what we got. Oh, more people are writing here. Sorry. Yes, little moon's reflecting the sun. Right, he's shining and we're reflecting. If I do as a painter does, I become a painter. If we imitate the sun, we show we are his sons. Right. You know, and John says that in 1 John 3, you know, dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. It's cool. It's exciting to think that, and even Nate's message a few weeks ago, I was listening to that the other day on the podcast and hearing, you know, like he was saying that no one person reveals the fullness of God, and that's true. So that in a group we can see a fuller picture of God, of our Father, you know, and of what the Spirit is doing in the earth, and who the Son calls his bride, you know. And so that in our time together, in thinking about meditating and encouraging each other, we see a fuller picture of God, to where we do start to understand who to imitate, you know, and how to imitate their character traits and disciplines in some of my friends. And I think, man, I really want to get better at that, you know. And I see that in them when I spend time with them, not when I don't spend time. I mean, obviously, how can you see anything if you're not beholding it? Even like John's saying, when we behold God and the Son in his glorified state, we become like him, because he changes us. I don't know, short book, you know, lots of kind of tying stuff together, but appreciate y'all's comments, and I think we're probably close to time, so let me see what time it is. I guess it doesn't really matter. If I don't have much more to say, no point in filling it up, but today I'm gonna, you know, try and keep my mind open to seeing him, asking him to reveal himself in a new way, in a glorified way that I haven't been able to see, and I'd imagine it'll probably come in a way that I didn't expect, probably through somebody else doing something where I'm like, man, they're doing good in that area. There's a bit of God in them, and I want to honor them, even as John started out this letter commending guys. You know, you're doing well because you're honoring strangers in the way that's honoring God. You know, it's showing whose son you are, whose daughter you are. You know, so something to think about. Bless you guys. It's Friday, so study up for Monday or Sunday, wherever you're going. Last couple things here. We imitate the heart of Christ to change our heart, not just to imitate actions, right? I mean, for sure. I heard a social, I don't know, guy studies like social science, like behavioral science. He was saying, you know, a lot of times we've thought that if you change your actions or your thoughts all the time, it'll change your actions. In fact, it can go both ways. If you just change your actions, though, it can change your heart. But it takes much longer to go that way. So by sitting with God and seeing him, thinking on him, letting him change our hearts, it will show with our actions, and that's good. That's good. All right, bless you guys. Thanks.